So welcome to the Deeptime Network. We are a network that is looking at everything inside of the grand narrative of the universe, the story of evolution. And we are a social and educational network. We offer courses. We'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And we're mostly offering our courses around what we call a deep time perspective, which is pulling together different wisdom traditions that Thomas Berry talked about, the fourfold wisdom traditions of science, indigenous spirituality, classical religions, and women's wisdom. And creation spirituality is such a crucially important part of those wisdom traditions and a contributor to the new cosmology movement that is happening today. And it's so fascinating, the common thread among the creation spirituality mystics, the way they move from a hyper-focus on the human to the whole, to the cosmos. So the idea that humans were birthed by something larger than themselves. And who better to talk about this than Matthew Fox, who really is the foremost scholar and spokesperson of creation spirituality today. Matthew Fox is a spiritual theologian, an Episcopal priest, and an activist for gender justice and eco-justice. He has written 39 books that have been translated into over 60 languages. As founder of the University of Creation Spirituality in California and the Cosmic Mass, he conducts dozens of workshops each year and is a visiting scholar at the Academy for the Love of Learning. He is the recipient of many awards, including the Abbey Courage of Conscience Peace Award. Recent projects include the Order of the Sacred Earth and daily meditations with Matthew Fox, as well as the Cosmic Mass. Many people in the Deeptime Network have been inspired by Brian Swimme and Thomas Berry, and it's so fascinating the way the lives of Brian Swimme and Thomas Berry and Matthew Fox have been interconnected. Brian Swimme was on Matthew Fox's faculty in both Chicago and Oakland, California, and it was at Matthew's Institute of Culture and Creation Spirituality at Mundelein College in Chicago, where Brian Swimme and Matthew Fox together met Thomas Berry for the first time. Both Brian Swimme and Matthew Fox worked with Thomas Berry over the years. What a difference in all of their lives and in the world. Because of so many people inspired by these people and their work. Dennis, you can put that link in the chat for the MatthewFox.org. And we're also celebrating today Matthew Fox's 39th book, which just came out. It's called Essential Writings on Creation Spirituality. Was just released by Orbis Press in their Modern Spiritual Masters series. And so his book is added to the likes of the Dalai Lama, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Mohandas Griffith, Thich Nhat Hanh, Swami Vivekananda, Thomas Berry, Howard Thurman, Teilhard de Chardin, Dorothée Soule, Joan Chittister, Catherine de Hewitt Doherty, Daniel Berrigan, and many others. So just to celebrate Matthew's new book, let's do a sign language applause and just raise our hands and go like this. Yay. Congratulations, congratulations, Matt, on your 39th book and in that company. So well deserved.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Jennifer, and your team for making this possible. Yeah, we're going to begin with a meditation from Hildegard of Bingen, who, as you probably are aware, was a great soul. And she had many visions, which she painted. This is one of them. And of course, she was a great musician, as well as being a healer and an author of 10 books and a scientist and a prophet. So she didn't actually paint this, but she dictated what it would be like. So this, and that's why her sisters who painted after she died sign it in the corner with her signature, a picture of her that she did paint, a self-portrait in the corner down the left there. But I call this the cosmic wheel, human work, the cosmic wheel that makes the cosmos go around. So you get a feel in this painting of her cosmology. And all pre-moderns, whether you're talking indigenous people or Hildegard, Aquinas, pre-modern thinkers don't begin with the human. They begin with the cosmos. And that's why we're really desperate in this postmodern time to bring in pre-modern thinking, because the modern era always begins with the human. I think, therefore I am. What she talks a lot about is animals. There are lobsters and bears and fishes and so forth around one of the outer circles. And of course, a snake is present as the outline of the entire painting. And she redeems the snake. She doesn't buy Genesis' notion that the snake is evil. In fact, she says the snake is the wisest of all creatures, creatures, meaning animals. But here we have the humans tilling the soil and so forth. So notice she's putting together human work and the cosmic work, that humans are here to contribute to the cosmos itself. Of course, this is what Thomas Berry means by the great work. So this, of course, she lived in the 12th century. And so she was thinking these thoughts and this consciousness. I just think it's a beautiful painting in itself. And the fire, of course, represents the fiery circle, represents the firmament of the universe. Okay, now you're going to be able to meditate on this painting while we listen to a short song that Hildegard composed. Of course, she wrote the lyrics too, and here are the lyrics. The song is called Caritas Abundat, and which means love abounds. And here's her brief poem that, of course, she's singing in, or the choir is singing in Latin. She wrote it in Latin. Love abounds in everything, in all things, from the depths, exalted and excelling up to every star. And most beloved of all, love abounds for the highest king. The kiss of peace is given. The kiss of peace is given to the highest king. So here, even in that poem, she's talking about the whole, isn't she? She's talking about cosmos, the cosmology, and that love is flowing through it all. Love abounds in all, from the smallest thing to the stars and beyond. So let us now listen to her music and be with her painting and invite her into our conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer and Hildegard. And it's interesting, Jennifer referred to the time when I and Brian Swim first met Tom Berry, and it was January in Chicago. And I remember we went out to dinner after Tom spoke to our class, and it was snowy and sloshy, and it was Chicago winter. And I, at the time, was working on my first book on Hildegard, which was on her illuminations, her paintings. She called her illumination, her paintings illuminations, because she said the living light spoke to her. The living light spoke to her. And I told Tom that I was doing this, and he was the first one in my life I had met who knew about Hildegard of Bingen. So I remember sloshing through the snow to go to the little restaurant, talking to him about Hildegard, and I was so thrilled because I hadn't met anyone who had ever heard of Hildegard, and yet he had. So there was already this connection. And so I think it's appropriate that we begin today with Hildegard. And in many ways, she is the first major figure in the Middle Ages to really lay out a creation spirituality worldview. Of course, she was building on the Celtic tradition. The monastery she belonged to, even though it was in Germany, was in fact a Celtic monastery. The Celts settled all the way down the Rhineland, and Bingen, the town she was from, and where she was in a monastery for years, her whole life really, from the age of 7. That was Celtic territory, if you will, as was northern Italy, which is where Francis of Assisi was so influenced by the Celts. And of course, as Celts settled into northern Spain as well, and St. Dominic had red hair, so he obviously had Celtic blood as well. So the Celts got around, but the point is that Celtic theology does not begin as Augustine does with sin, human sin. It begins as the Bible does with creation. And that's a very big difference. Today we know it's 13.8 billion years difference, whether you start with humans and their sins, or you start with the universe. It's a pretty damn big difference. And it's a scandal that religion went down the rabbit hole of fear, and fear of nature, and fear of the body, and fear of going to hell, and use that as a bludgeon far too often. The Bible itself, chapter 1 of Genesis, I urge you to reread it in light of the new creation story. There's not a word about sin and evil in chapter 1, even after humans come on board. In fact, it very much parallels today's creation story. It begins with light. Okay, that could be translated the fireball, right? And that went on for 750,000 years, the fireball. Einstein said what he wanted to do his whole life was to study light. That is what he would have loved to have done his whole life, just to study light. Well, in my book on deep ecumenism, One River, Many Wells, where I deal with all the spiritual traditions of the world, and I take 18 themes. One of them is the theme of light. And what I found is that light is the most common synonym for divinity around the world, in all the world traditions. The Buddha talks about be a light unto yourself and enlightenment. And of course, the Gospels talk about Christ as the light of the world and so forth. But what I demonstrate is that all the Celtic tradition is extremely big on light. Of course, they should be, because they're so far north, it's both cold and dark. But the point is that the archetype of light is how the Bible begins too. Let there be light. First word, and there was light. And then the first chapter of Genesis goes through and names the sun and the moon, the creatures and all this, the trees, the animals. And it's all called good, good, good. And that same word in Hebrew can be translated beautiful. Oh, it's beautiful, it's beautiful, beautiful. Every chapter of the unfolding universe is beautiful and good. And then at the end, just as in today's science story, at the end comes tripping in the humans. The humans trip in at the very end of the creation story in Genesis and in science, today's science story. And the Bible says everything together, including the human, is, quote, very good, very beautiful. That's Genesis 1. It's only in the next chapters that we get into Adam and Eve and sin and all that stuff. So this is where creation spirituality begins, with creation, da. And maybe it's important, da. Thomas Berry wrote a wonderful foreword to this book on Thomas Merton's writings on nature called When the Trees Say Nothing, which is a statement from one of his poems, Thomas Merton's poems. And here's what Thomas Berry says. Everywhere we find ourselves invaded by the world of the sacred. An absence of a sense of the sacred is a basic flaw in many of our efforts at ecologically or environmentally adjusting our human presence to the natural world. It has been said, we will not save what we do not love. It is also true that we will neither love nor save what we do not experience as sacred. Eventually, he says, only our sense of the sacred will save us. Eventually, only our sense of the sacred will save us. I received a dream about 20 years ago, a very important dream, not just for me, but for all of us. And it said this, it said, there's nothing wrong with human species today except one thing. Now that itself is kind of startling. I think if I invited you to pull out pen and paper and start listing what's wrong with the human race today, you'd come up with not more than one thing. You'd have a very long list in a very short time. And then the dream went on. You have lost the sense of the sacred. That was the dream. We have lost the sense of the sacred. Now, how do we recover a sense of the sacred? Well, Thomas Berry was explicit on this. You return to a sense of the universe, that the universe is the ultimate sacrament, that's the word I use, the ultimate expression of the sacred. And this then is creation spirituality. Begin with creation, the universe, and its 13.8 billion year story. And as Thomas Aquinas said in the 13th century, he said the most excellent thing in the universe is not the human. Sorry about that. Modern era, because a modern era put the human first all the time. I think, therefore I am. Today, capitalism, I buy, therefore I am, and I'm big and I'm strong, and I have lots of money and power. No, that's not what we're here for. As Aquinas said, the most excellent thing in the universe is not the human, it is the universe itself. Now, I heard Thomas speak probably, or countless times, I would guess over 20 times in my life, because he frequently came to my schools and lectured. And I never heard him speak once without quoting Thomas Aquinas. He was named after Thomas Berry, Thomas Aquinas. This is patron saint. But he loved Aquinas because, why? For the same reason that he loved Hildegard and the painting of Hildegard as we just saw, because both begin with the cosmos, which of course was his life's work and Brian Swimm's marvelous book on the universe story and the seedlings from it, including the journey of the universe and so forth. All this tells us what was on Thomas Berry's mind. And even toward the end of his writing in the Great Work book, he's talking about our work mirroring and contributing to the work of the universe. It's exactly what Aquinas was talking about 700 years earlier in that regard. So Thomas was very devoted to Thomas Aquinas, and it was really interesting. This man who had, of course, studied other religions deeply, and including indigenous religions, and of course today's science. he nevertheless felt very connected, like an umbilical cord, to the consciousness of these pre-modern thinkers, both indigenous people, but Aquinas and Hildegard and others as well. So, so people ask, what is creation spirituality? Okay, it begins with creation, not with the human, but with creation. And remember what Aquinas says, the primary and fundamental meaning of religion is this: supreme thankfulness and gratitude. That's what authentic religion is about. He doesn't say anything about staying out of hell or building empires. The primary meaning of religion, says Aquinas, is gratefulness and gratitude, supreme gratitude and gratefulness. So creation spirituality obviously represents a paradigm shift. The modern age, unlike the pre-modern age, has been preoccupied with going from continent to continent and beating up on indigenous peoples, destroying their cultures as far as possible, telling them they were all savages and pagans and ignorant and had to be redeemed by the cross. And of course, stealing slaves from Africa, all for one economic purpose, to make these various empires, Portuguese, Spanish, French, English, and so forth, to build their capital. And of course, we're paying the price for all that ignorance today. And fortunately, the indigenous people have not disappeared, nor has their wisdom. And I'll tell you this story about Hildegard. The very first time I translated Hildegard, and that was back in Chicago, the time I was working on her, and Tom Barron had that conversation. I shared one of her poems with the class. And immediately this fellow spoke up. He said, I've just come from living on an Indian reservation in South Dakota for 16 years. And that woman you just cited sounds exactly like my spiritual director, who was a medicine man on the reservation. Well, I was blown away. You know, I was just beginning to share Hildegard. And the first response I had was, oh, this is an indigenous thinker. And she lived 800 years ago in Germany. I was stunned, but of course I understand it now. I mean, I was very pleasantly stunned, I assure you, because I too have been blessed by many indigenous teachers and who joined my faculty over the years and blessed us with ceremonies from sweat lodges to vision quests and sun dances and powwows and so forth. So, and I grew up in Wisconsin, had many dreams of indigenous people and so forth when I was young. So the indigenous spirit is still very alive on the land in Wisconsin, or at least it was back then. But this was an awakening for me to see the connection between a 12th century consciousness of a 12th century Benedictine nun and a late 20th century medicine man in the Lakota tradition. So that was exciting to me. And the fact that your organization likes to talk about the indigenous consciousness alongside the new cosmology is very important and very, very wonderful. In my most recent book on Meister Eckhart, I put him in the room with, you know, each chapter he's with a different tradition, like Rabbi Heschel in chapter 1, and then Thich Nhat Hanh in chapter 3, and with Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry and Brian Swim in chapter 2 in Cosmology. But I also have them there with Black Elk in along indigenous thinking, because Black Elk and Meister Eckhart share a lot of teachings together. So again, the creation tradition is very indigenous. Of course, the indigenous people begin with creation. And now the creation tradition is also the oldest tradition in the Bible. It is the J source in the Hebrew Bible, which is the oldest source. And it is also the tradition of the historical Jesus, because all scholars agree today that Jesus came from the wisdom tradition of Israel. And the wisdom tradition is about the theophany of nature, about finding God in nature, in the book of nature. And Aquinas says, Revelation comes in 2 volumes, the Bible and nature. And so both of those are explored in the creation tradition. And of course, necessarily then the creation tradition invites science and listens to science, because scientists' job is to explore nature, isn't it? They don't always get it right. They're human beings. But nevertheless, Aquinas was absolutely fierce about that, going for Aristotle in his day, because Aristotle was the new scientist on the block. He was the Einstein of the time. He had 3 strikes against him. First of all, he was, quote, pagan, that is pre-Bible and pre-Christian. Second, he came to Europe by way of Islam. It was in Baghdad that scores of translators were translating Aristotle into Latin, and then it went from Baghdad to Spain. And this was considered very controversial, because because he was a pagan and because he came by way of Islam into Europe. But this did not faze Aquinas at all. Aquinas says, all truth, whoever utters it, comes from the Holy Spirit. Let me say that again. All truth, whoever utters it, comes from the Holy Spirit. And Aquinas was absolutely ravenous about learning more about the universe, about creation. And that's why he wrote 10 books on Aristotle, 10 commentaries on Aristotle's physics, metaphysics, logic, ethics, politics, psychology, because Aristotle was the smartest guy in the room in the 13th century. The Muslim culture was way ahead of European culture in the 13th century. And Aquinas was vilified for this, because to love Aristotle was to leave Augustine and Platonism in the rear room. And Aquinas is explicit about why he chose Aristotle over Plato. He did not write one book on Plato, not one. He didn't write one book on Augustine. Now, he brings them in. He's not ignorant of what they have to say, and not everything they say is negative, but he was so aware of how dualistic they were. He said, I prefer Aristotle to Plato because Aristotle does not denigrate matter. Period. You can't be much more honest and explicit than that. This is a beginning of feminism, I propose. I call Aquinas a proto-feminist. Why? Because Rosemary Ruther, the great Catholic feminist theologian, says that the foundation of patriarchy is dualism. And the foundation of feminism is non-dualism. That whole issue of body versus soul and spirit versus matter. And Aquinas understood this, and he carried the ball, and he was attacked for it. He was so controversial in his day that at times the King of France had to call out his army to surround the convent where Aquinas lived. Why? Because the parish priest has whipped up this stuff against Aquinas. What's he doing bringing this pagan scientist? Who needs science? We have all the questions in the Bible. The fundamentalists of the 13th century were no different from the fundamentalists today. So creation spirituality is all of this. It's working with science. It's experiencing the theophany, the mysticism of nature. You know, many scholars today believe that Jesus was considered illegitimate in his village. So when the Sabbath came along, he was not allowed to pray in the synagogue. So he went out into nature to pray while everyone else was praying in the synagogue. And that's why his teachings, his parables are just flooded with nature stories. You take the nature stories out of Jesus' parables, and there's nothing left. 90% nature. Sheep and goats and sparrows that fall from the tree, and the rain that falls on the just and the unjust, and the lilies of the field. It goes on and on. The guy was a peasant farmer and a carpenter, so he's also a craftsman, an artist. And that's very important to the creation tradition, the role of art and creativity. So one of the questions is asked, well, is this a hidden tradition? Now let me say too, now I've named some of the great figures from the Middle Ages on, such as Hildegard, and then Francis of Assisi was born 2 years after Hildegard died. And then comes Aquinas, and then comes Mechtilde Magdeburg, a Beguine, a member of the Beguine movement, which was an alternative lifestyle for women in the Middle Ages before the Catholic sister movement was created. And then comes Meister Eckhart, and then comes Julian of Norwich. And that's the 14th century. She lived through the pandemic then. And unlike most people, she didn't freak out. In fact, she's so thoroughly creation-centered, and she was the first woman to write a book in English. She says, God is the goodness in nature, and nature and God are one. And she goes on this way. She's utterly non-dualistic. And Thomas Berry says that creation spirituality was killed by the Black Death. The 14th century, the pandemic then was so severe, and of course they had no science to understand what was going on, that it made people afraid of nature and afraid of death. And you see that from the end of 14th century on, with some exceptions in the Renaissance, and of course, Nicholas of Cusa, who was a great scientist and knew Eckhart very well, and also Hildegard. Cusa is just a short trip, about an hour away, as I recall, from Bingen, Hildegard's town on the Rhine. But the Protestant Reformation and the Council of Trent response to it by Catholicism, neither of them talk about creation. It was all about sin and redemption, sin and redemption, sin and redemption. And they went to war about it, of course. Are you going to go to hell because you don't do good works? Because you're automatically saved because God loved you before you were born or something? It was all about, that's what religion has been mostly about the last 5 centuries, people. The modern era has not been about mysticism. Didn't you know what mysticism is? Reduce it to asceticism. They're not teaching spiritual practices in most divinity schools or seminaries. They don't teach you how to be a mystic, which is why I started the schools that I did. So the question I was asked, is creation spirituality a hidden tradition? Well, you'd think it was, the way that religion has gone the last 500 years, but it's out of the closet now. And of course, for example, I wrote a book called Original Blessing, and the Vatican went berserk, absolutely berserk, blew the roof off the house, which sold me a lot of books, by the way. But Aquinas says, and Aquinas is not only a saint, but a doctor of the church. He says, and I quote, he talks about original goodness and talks about it frequently. Now, I didn't know this when I got blasted for writing a book on original blessing. I mean, I knew the spirit of Aquinas, but it was after I was condemned that I saw these words of Aquinas. And Hildegard, who is now a saint and doctor of the church, she talks about original wisdom. So original blessing is both of those things. Blessing is a theological word for goodness. So this just shows how ignorant religion has become, that the popes of the late 20th century and early 21st century were ignorant that the doctors and saints in the church have been writing about original goodness and original blessing for over 800 years. So it shows what a a marriage there was to the idea of original sin. Even though no Jew has ever heard of original sin, that means Jesus never heard of original sin. What the hell is a Christian church doing, leading with original sin, a concept that Jesus never even heard of? Well, I'll tell you what the church is doing. It's holding up an empire, because it was in the 4th century and only in the 4th century that the term original sin was born, and it was born by Augustine, who is a radical dualist, who said, and I quote, "Spirit is whatever is not matter," unquote. That's the basis of the fall redemption, religion, tradition, and it's totally foreign to Jewish thinking. Elie Wiesel says original sin is not in the Bible, and it's foreign to it's alien to Jewish thinking. Well, that means it's alien to Jesus thinking, folks. Jesus was a Jew. So we've taken this detour. Of course, it's been hidden, creation spirituality. Why did it take them 800 years to canonize Hildegard? Well, because she took on bishops and even popes in her day, and that was not appreciated by those who were more interested in power than in real religion. So why is creation spirituality important today? I've been asked to address. Well, I began with that when I quoted Barry, a return of the sacred, and my dream. A return of the sacred has to be the seed for reinventing everything. And of course, Barry loved to talk about that, about our work. I wrote a book on the reinvention of work before Barry wrote his book on the great work. And I have a quote right up front in the book from Rilke about the great work. The great work is the human psyche connecting to the cosmos again. That's what has always brought life to humanity. Think of Stonehenge. Think of Stonehenge. So here, these humans, our ancestors, brought huge rocks, tons, weighing tons, for miles to build something before the wheel was invented. What got them out of their couches to turn off the TV and to bring these huge rocks to this place? It was to celebrate the solstice and the equinox and so forth. It was the cosmos connecting to the human psyche. When the cosmos does not connect to the human psyche, which is the real purpose of all authentic ritual, when it does not connect, humans get in trouble. They think the world is about us. And that's exactly what we've been thinking for at least 500 years in the West. It's all about us. And religion's role is to save us from hell, individuals from hell. That's the basic story. So that's why the new cosmology is so important, of course, to wash that nonsense away. Does it mean that healthy religion is gone out the door? Well, no, but that's why I prefer the word spirituality to religion. And I told my Dominican superiors this when I was a student. I said, look, my generation is going to be less interested in religion and more interested in spirituality. This would have been about 1963, 64. And I said, but we don't have any courses on spirituality. We're just doing things, but we don't discuss it. We don't have any courses on the mystics. I said, why don't you send someone to get a doctorate in spirituality? And I said, I'm glad to volunteer. And make a long story short, I wrote Thomas Burton, and he said to go to Paris, which is where I went. And that's where I met Père Chenu, Chenu, who was my mentor insofar as he named the creation spiritual tradition for me. He was a 75-year-old Dominican who was a peritus at the Second Vatican Council and really wrote the most radical document that went on the church in the modern world. Wonderful human being. And but he named the creation tradition for me. So yes, it has been hidden. I'd never heard of that before, that there are these two traditions. The fall redemption, which I would call the anthropocentric, begins with the human fall and sin, and it's downhill from there, versus that which begins with creation. And I remember the day Chenu named those differences in class, it was like, scales falling off my eyes. It was like Paul falling off his horse. I was thrilled because it made sense of my own experience growing up in Wisconsin in a large family and so forth, that I had no bias against nature. I didn't think you had to go to church to pray. I went to church to pray. I loved liturgy and all that. But I also loved sports, and I loved literature, and I loved music, and I loved being outdoors in the 4 seasons. And Wisconsin used to have 4 seasons before climate change really came home to us. So another reason the tradition's been hidden is because it's feminist and non-dualistic. So it doesn't fit into a dualistic view of the world. And it calls on the wisdom of women as well as men. And this painting over my shoulder here is the original cover for my most recent book, the book on Julian. You see, you have these great women, Julian of Norwich and Hildegard of Bingen and Mechtilde Magdeburg, she being part of the women's movement, the Beguine movement, and Eckhart working very closely with the Beguine movement, even when the Pope at the time, the very Pope who condemned Eckhart a week after he died, the Pope, John 22nd, he condemned the Beguines 17 different times. So you have to understand the venom against the feminine. The venom against the feminine. It's not just that they weren't, what should I say, encouraging women to think for themselves. Women found ways to, like the Benedictine order to which Hildegard belonged. They were strong in themselves, the women were. In fact, Hildegard was especially strong. She walked out. She was raised in a bi-gender monastery. The Celts were not all hung up on sex like Augustine and the Southern Europeans were. So they had bi-gender, men and women living together in the Celtic monastery in which she was raised. But when she took over as abbess and when she wrote her first book, it became so popular that more and more women wanted to come in and study with Hildegard, and the men wouldn't move over and give the women more room. So she took all of her women and left and started her own monastery. And we have the letter from the abbot saying, come back, and bring your nuns back and bring their dowries back. Back then, you had to have a dowry to be a nun. And Hildegard said, her letter back was all about injustice. No, she said, no, she said this. And so, these are real stories about what creation spirituality stirs up. And of course, I've learned from my, what should I say, somewhat checkered experience after being a Dominican for 34 years, that there is a lot of fear of creation spirituality. But I think that's dwindling now, because I think people are recognizing that, hey, as a species, we're coming to the end here. We have 7 years left, according to the latest scientific news from the UN. 7 years to change our ways. And a big part of that change is everything I'm talking about. It is bringing in the divine feminine to balance the masculine and to evict patriarchy as a worldview. And that's what it is. It's a philosophy. It's a way of looking at the world dualistically. Evict that and develop a healthy masculine, so we can have this balance of healthy masculine and the divine feminine. And we're not going to survive without that. So this has to be done now, yesterday. And we have to reinvent education, because education itself is a big part of the problem. As Einstein said, quote, "I abhor American education," unquote. Why? Because it's all about the rational brain. And the intuitive brain, what I would call the mystical brain, the right hemisphere of the brain, is about, as he said, intuition and deep feeling and values. He said values do not come from the rational brain. But that's another way of saying that people who go through our educational system are on their own when it comes to values. because I don't know any programs that really bring in the right hemisphere of the brain in our academic worlds, which is why when I started teaching spirituality at Mundelein College, I created artist meditation as an integral part to the educational process. Half of my work has been about religion, but half has been about education, because I realized early that you can't teach spirituality in a European model of education that honors only the left hemisphere of the brain. You just can't do it. The heart is in the body, after all. And if we're trying to feed the heart, nurture the heart, grow the heart for courage and for prophetic standing up to injustice, then we've got to reinvent education. And I did this for over 45 years with adults in the doctoral program, master program, and then with inner city kids. I wanted to try it out there. And I've seen tremendous results constantly, that people undergo profound conversions when they do artist meditation, whether it's clay, whether it's dance, whether it's music, whether it's massage, and wonderful people get in touch with the truth of themselves. So there's no cosmology without art. And of course, ritual, and that's Stonehenge, is an ultimate expression of art. It's the art of arts, because it brings all the artists and all the creativity of the community together. And our cosmic masses have been very exciting because we've deliberately tried to do what Rilke says. He says, the work of the eyes is finished now. Go and do heart work on all the images that are hidden inside of you. So too much church today, too much ritual is eye work still. Turning pages. What page are you on? What page is he on? What page? What page? Indigenous people wouldn't think of bringing a book to worship. You don't bring a book into a sweat lodge, it would die. And besides, there are no lights. So, the idea that you have to pray from a book is very, very strange. And it's really perverse, because you're not getting to the heart for a lot of people at this time. In a postmodern time, it's perverse. In modern era, it was part of the excitement of the invention of the printing press in the 15th century. But we're in postmodern age now. And so there are other ways to pray, including DJ and VJ and dance and rap and all these new postmodern art forms. Of course, we should be bringing them into worship. Just as in the 12th century, they brought the new experience of stained glass within the Gothic architecture to bring light in and excitement and joy and beauty. And that's how you get people moving, through ritual. So I've tried to touch on these 4 questions I was asked to speak to. What is Christ spirituality? How is it a hidden tradition? How did it contribute to the new cosmology movement? Of course, that's my invoking of Thomas Berry and so forth. And why is it important today? So I hope there's meat here for us to discuss when it's time for questions and answers. I would just close by, I think I'll comment on this picture over my shoulder, which is the picture on the cover of the book. This is a vision that Julian had, 14th century. One day she saw a glowing, and this picture sits here, a glowing ball, she said, in her hand, the size of a hazelnut. And she said, "What is this?" And the answer was, "This is everything that is created." In other words, the cosmic Christ, all of creation, the whole universe. But she said, "It's so fragile. It could fall apart at any time." And the answer was, it is kept together by love. It is kept together by love. Now, that's very much Teilhard's insight in the 20th century as well. But let me close with a statement from an astronaut. Many astronauts and cosmonauts, when they went into space or went to the moon, came back mystics. And they didn't know this was going to happen. And no one at NASA in Houston had any spiritual directors around to deal with it. But here is a statement from Edgar Mitchell, who went to the moon and back. On the return trip home, gazing through 240,000 miles of space toward the stars and the planet from which I had come, I suddenly experienced, that's what spirituality is, experience. I suddenly experienced the universe as an intelligent, loving, and harmonious. Intelligent, loving, harmonious. The universe. And on seeing the earth, he said, my view of our planet was a glimpse of divinity. My view of our planet was a glimpse of divinity. And now Boris Volynov was a Russian cosmonaut, and he said this: during a space flight, the psyche of each astronaut is reshaped. Let's reshape the psyche. There's nothing like a mystical experience to reshape a psyche. He goes on. That's me talking, that last sentence. Having seen the sun, the stars, and our planet, you become more full of life and softer. Softer. Mysticism does that. You begin to look at all living things with great trepidation, and you begin to be more kind and patient with the people around you. At any rate, that is what happened to me. So I think in this time of conflict between Russia and Ukraine and America and the West and all that, it's important to look again. And as Black Elk says, the first peace is a peace between the human and the cosmos. And all other peace is an expression of that. So what the creation story is bringing in is this new and awesome and wonderful relationship, again, anew, with the universe, as our ancestors had, our pre-modern ancestors, whether medieval creation mystics or indigenous peoples. But out of that, and with our new technology, being able to travel beyond Earth and look back at it and return to it, we have these ex-jet fighter pilots called astronauts confessing that they become softer, that they are mystics, that there's something divine about home, about the earth. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. Oh, the way you speak so powerfully about connecting the human psyche to the cosmos and connecting us to our hearts again. This is such a crucial contribution of creation spirituality to the new cosmology and to what we need today to evolve our planet to the next level. So now let's think of some questions we want to ask Matt. And I'm actually going to jump in with a question first, because I'm just dying to ask this. Matt, one of the things that Julian said was, evil can serve a larger purpose. And I'm just wondering, given what's happening in the world today, how can you and all of us reflect on that statement?
Yeah, since the first day of the invasion of Ukraine, in my daily meditations, I've been talking about evil. So I invite people there, and it's free. You just go to Daily Meditations with MatthewFox.org. And I think it's more than time now to be talking about evil. And evil is much bigger than sin. One of the big insights I learned about sin versus evil came from Buck Ghosthorse, a Lakota teacher who was on my faculty and to whom I was close and did my vision quest with him and so forth. He said to me one day, in our tradition, he said, fear is a door in the heart that lets evil spirits in. Fear is a door in the heart that lets evil spirits in. I've been living with that insight for decades. And I think it's so profound that sin is like a door in the heart or in another chakra. And I wrote a major book on evil called Sins of the Spirit, Blessings of the Flesh, Transforming Evil in Soul and Society, where, among other things, I take the 7 chakras and compare them to the 7 capital sins of the West. Because to talk about the chakras is to talk about these points, if you will, in our physiology and psychology and spirituality that are energy points. And so Buck Oster is naming one, the heart is one of the chakras. But he says, fear is a door in the heart that lets evil spirits in. So I'm saying, okay, there are doors in all of our chakras. And evil spirits, you see, religion has oversold sin. I mean, really oversold sin and bored everyone with it. I can't tell you how many people, both Protestant and Catholic, I've had in classes over the years, over the decades, when we talked about this, and they all said about whether they were Catholic or Protestant, about the age of 14, they learned from their religion that everything they liked was sinful. So they gave up on most of it. I mean, on most of religion. And so we've trivialized evil in the form of this exaggerated boy crying wolf notion of sin. And so we don't even have a language to talk about evil, which is why I wrote my book, to come up with a new language, bringing East and West together, chakras and the capital sins. And it really works. I'll give you one example. The 7th chakra, of course, is here at the crown of the head. And it represents a culmination of all of our sacred energy, the kundalini that comes through all our body and up the spine. And then the culmination is our light goes out then into the universe to link up with other light beings. And this includes other humans, creating community and common good work, Thomas Berry's term, and angels, light beings, and ancestors. All this is a culmination of a healthy consciousness. So that's your healthy chakra. But if it's off-center, an off-center chakra, like Aquinas defines sin as misdirected love, which is very Jewish because the Jewish word for sin is an archery term, meaning missing the bullseye. So the bullseye is a chakra. And if we're missing it, if it's off-center, what is that 7th chakra then? It's envy. Why? Because envy recognizes the light in others. But instead of wanting to link up, create community and good work together, it wants to shoot it down. And the whole Ukraine war going on is about envy. Putin does not want a democracy next door to him. He's envious of the Ukrainians. Now, they're very young in their democracy. Of course, America is totally old and tired and sick in its democracy, but we won't get into that. But the point is that that's what's going on. And envy leads to war. It leads to lies about people. I'll tell you, I know for a fact that a lot of my trouble with the American Dominicans was envy. I have a lot of evidence of that. Wherever there's patriarchy, there's envy. Wherever. Most of our institutions run practically on envy. So this is a culmination. Envy is like a culminating, and of course, we're told that Satan envied God. So that's just one example of an alternative understanding and language for dealing with the severity of evil. Evil is real and it is deep. And now what Julian is saying is also something that Eckhart said right before her. Eckhart said that all things praise God, even evil praises God and blesses God. So you have both of them talking about the possibility of evil to wake us up. You know, the evil of climate change is an invitation to get out of our couches and put our tremendous imaginations and creativity and technology to good work. But of course, to do that, you're going to have to take on great forces of oil corporations and the rest who have been in denial or pretending they're in denial, been lying about it for decades, that they know. It's like the cigarette manufacturers. They know what cigarettes was doing to the human lung, and that's why they got finally battered by Congress. Now, the same is true of oil corporations, but we're still paying them billions every year from our taxes, as if they're not making enough already. So the evil is not the last word. That is what Julian is saying, and that is what Eckhart is saying, and that is what the cross says in the Christian tradition, and that Good Friday is not the end of the story, and especially in time of Lent, that's not a bad idea to meditate on that. So, but we have to prove that evil is not the last word. It's not something that's just floating around in the ether. In human history, it could be the last word. A nuclear war, or what's facing us in terms of our own extinction regarding climate change and all the other species that are coming down with us. That's about as evil as you can get. So the jury isn't in yet, and that's what is really important about the era in which we find ourselves. And whether you're 17 years old or 87 years old, we've all got a role to play in standing up to this evil, in that prophetic role of saying no, and then the creativity that must flow to reinvent the way we do everything, beginning with education, because we're not really passing on the values that we need to pass on through our education. At least that's what Einstein thought, and I agree. So I would say that is my response to your question, that evil does not have the last word. Now, I just wrote an essay, Daily Meditations, a couple of days ago. I had this insight because I've been wrestling for years. The medievals defined evil as the lack of good, privatio boni, the privation of the good. And that is one understanding of evil, and it says a lot, but it's not enough, I don't think. I think evil is also a force and an energy in itself. I have met evil people, and I have many stories of others who have met evil people and evil movements. And I don't think Hitler was just operating out of his own psyche. I think he brought in these, what Bakostos calls the evil spirits. And Paul talks about that. Our struggle is against powers and principalities. Powers and principalities are angels. So, and I think today we don't have to we don't have to use the language of Satan and Beelzebub and Lucifer, but the language of racism and sexism and militarism and power over, these are evil forces. And how do I know that? Because they don't die. They're immortal like spirits are. We die, but they don't die. They keep coming back in every generation. And that's why we have to stand up to them and offer alternatives. So the topic of evil is a big topic. And of course, Jung liked the word shadow to talk about evil. And that too teaches us something, that evil is everywhere. It's not just in Putin or in Putin's view of the world. There's plenty of it going on in our so-called democracy. So-called, it's not a democracy anymore. Maybe we can get it back, but it's not. And so evil is not over there. And it's a real mistake to project it onto a Hitler or onto a Putin. Yes, there's no question in my mind that Putin is actively involved in evil. But we all are capable of that. That's the point, that the shadow is part of all of us. So we all have to do our soul searching, not only about ourselves personally, but about the structures we contribute to, and the work that we do, and the professions we're part of. And really, Barry is saying that too when he says we have to reinvent the legal profession to protect the trees and the more than humans and so forth. And so we've all got this calling to stand up to evil. and not be overcome by it. So you want to nurture the mystic in you, which is the lover. But the prophet is a mystic in action. So you also want to do what you can to say no to those forces that are encircling us at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So let's go to Cynthia. Cynthia, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you so much. I've carried the concept of original blessing with me for years and share it with people. But I'm wondering what you think of something I was told when I visited Water. It was years and years ago. Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, Religion outside of DC in Maryland. And there was a young woman, an intern from Ireland. And she said, people talk about St. Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland. She said that wasn't it, that snakes were associated with the feminine in God. And what St. Patrick drove out of Ireland was the feminine in God.
Well, very interesting. And I remember I pointed out to you the painting we saw by Hildegard today, how the parameter was a snake. And what she said about, she said it was the biggest surprise of the story of Garden of Eden is that the snake, who's the wisest of creatures, played a negative role, if you will, played the shadow role. So she was trying to redeem the snake, and the snake is an ancient archetype for the goddess, no question about it. So that's one interpretation of the Patrick story, and it's interesting, and it's possible because the Celtic tradition was very strong, and still is really, about women. Strong women in Ireland. And of course, St. Bridget very much embodies that practice of strong womanhood. Now, there's a real good book on Celtic spirituality that came out this year by John Philip Newell, and I recommend it highly. And I'm trying to think if I have it right near me here to show you the cover. But Dennis can probably come up with the exact title. I don't remember it right now. But there's a whole chapter on St. Bridget. And there's certainly stuff on Patrick too. But I don't think we don't know a lot of the facts. You know, a lot of these are stories. Of course, the Irish are very good at stories, and peasant people are very good at carrying on stories. After all, you know, the Bible wasn't written for hundreds of years. And because we used to have better memories before printing presses and before Xerox machines and computers. So, but nevertheless, we don't know the exact facts, but it's an interesting idea that the notion that Patrick drove out snakes is really about driving out the goddess. But I don't think we can really project that onto Patrick. I don't have evidence that he was anti-women or dualistic. I mean, the prayers we have that are in his name are very cosmic again. And you see, when you put things in the context of the cosmos, think of yin yang. It's easier to see a balance of night and day and of masculine and feminine, you know, to see the dialectic, the dance between differences instead of freezing them. And for example, in institutions that say that women get 70% of what a man gets for the same job or something. So I think we have to be a little careful of kind of drawing too many conclusions from this. But the idea is interesting, but I think you have to put in the context of what else we know about Patrick. And I don't have the impression that he was a negative figure in history. But maybe people picked up on that notion after he died and so forth, when the myths started traveling and said, oh, well, what he really was doing was driving the goddess out. I think it's more the Council of Whitby in the 6th century that tried to Romanize the Celtic countries and put them under a much tighter grip that was, of course, very patriarchal, because it came from the Southern Europe, from Mediterranean, Jerome and Augustine, both of whom had tremendous trouble with women and with the body. And so I think it was more that kind of thing that really, and of course, the arrival of Jansenism in the 17th century to Ireland was horrible, horrible, tragic happening. And Jansenism was kind of a left-wing political movement in France. They took on Cardinal Richelieu and so forth, and the marriage of the empire builders with the church. So it had that political sense to it. But when they transferred it to Ireland, it had none of the political sense. And what is Jansenism? Jansenius was a Belgian bishop who wrote one book in his life on, guess who? Augustine. And Jansenism was the essence of dualism. I mean, it tried to make every Irishman and every Irish woman on the planet to feel guilty and shame for having a body. And it succeeded in many instances, a lot of shame. And so it has nothing to do with the Celtic tradition. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It tried to wipe out the Celtic at-homeness with nature, including human nature, and the body and sexuality. So I'd be a little careful of just projecting everything negative on St. Patrick. There have been many moments, if you will, in Celtic history and Irish history. And of course, the invasion by the English Empire, takeover of Ireland, and trying to wipe away of the language and so much else. I mean, that's a low point too, of course, in Irish and Celtic history. But anyway, I recommend very much John Philip Newell's book. It's really solid. It's very up to date, and he writes very well, and he's a wonderful human being. And he lives in Edinburgh. He's a Scottish Celtic, and he ran the Iona community for a number of years. They call the head of that community not an abbot, but a warden, which doesn't really translate well in American English, being a warden of a community. But he and his wife ran that community for many years. So he knows very deeply the Celtic tradition. And his chapter on St. Bridget, I think, would be especially valuable for you. And also his writing there on Patrick as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Cynthia. By the way, John Layden says there were never snakes in Ireland. Ireland was covered by a mile-high ice up. Whoops, this is moving around.
John Layden from the Philippines. He's on board too?
Yes, he is.
Wonderful. Hello, John Layden.
Hi, Matthew.
Oh,
Good to see you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful point. And I think actually Philip makes that point in his book too, but I probably forgot it. But that just says it all. There are no snakes there. So what is this? You know?
Yes. And the intern said that there were no snakes in Ireland. And yet we hear that he drove the snakes out of Ireland. That's when she was saying it was
I see.
feminine.
Yeah, the feminine, the goddess. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, I'm going to jump to a name that I don't recognize, just because it's nice to call on people I don't recognize. Pedro Gonzalez. Can you? I'm sorry, Pedro Rodriguez. Pedro Rodriguez. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Are you there, Pedro?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I love what do you call it? This type of spirituality, creation spirituality. But having said that, I have lately been getting into anthroposophy with Rudolf Steiner. And I would love to hear Matthew's take on it, because and also because the Waldorf education method vinculated to that I would like to know if you're familiar with it. Well, I'm a novice in anthroposophy, but if you have anything to say about that, because you spoke about education,
Yes.
re-educating people. Would the Waldorf method be useful for that? And also your
Definitely.
take on
Definitely.
anthroposophy.
Definitely. I have a lot of respect for Rudolf Steiner and for Waldorf education, and also for Maria Montessori education, which begins again with the cosmos as well. And a very close friend of mine, MC Richards, who was a potter and wrote the important book Centering, was very much Rudolf Steiner student and practitioner. The last 15 years of her life, she lived in a Rudolf Steiner community in Pennsylvania with adults with mental problems, I guess you'd call it. I don't remember the exact terminology, but I visited her several times there. It was a wonderful community where they had ordinary adults, if you will, working side by side and living. And she would teach clay and meditation with these people who had some handicaps. And she taught me a lot about Steiner too. And of course, Steiner was very big on rituals, among other things. And I have a good friend in Hawaii, former priest, Philip, who's very heavy in Steiner work too. He once said he wanted to write a doctoral thesis on creation spirituality and Steiner cosmology, because he saw the connection too. And I have a good friend who worked in a Steiner school for years in New England. So anyway, yeah, I have a lot of respect for Steiner education. I think it's doing what we need to do, which is far less anthropocentric than the dominant educational model in the West, and it's very oriented not only toward nature, but toward creativity. I've met students who grew up in a Steiner high school, for example. They're just more creative than students you find from public schools. They're willing to make mistakes. And I think that's something you have to learn early in life, that mistakes aren't necessarily a bad thing. That's how you learn. And that's how we learn to walk, after all, by falling. So anyway, I respect you for being in that kind of work, and I think there's a lot of future there. Here in the Bay Area, there are actually some Steiner schools that have been accepted as part of the public school system, to provide more finance, because I know what Steiner school is money, finding it. It's a private school system. So that's kind of interesting, I think. But
I'm very happy with that answer.
Yeah, my experience with Steiner education has been very positive over the years, and I've had a number of fortunate interactions with it and with people who are kind of committed to the Steiner philosophy.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you so much, Pedro.
Sure.
We also have a lot of Montessori teachers who take our programs, and she has the cosmic education curriculum that starts at the elementary level. Judy Ballerline she had her hand up a minute ago. She was president of the American Montessori Society.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She's been very involved in our programs.
Wonderful.
Okay, now I know it's 8:33 and we were going to say the program would go until 8:30. I think we'll go just a little bit longer because there do seem to be some questions here. But if you need to leave, just drop off. That's one of the beauties of Zoom. You can do that. So we'll just go for a few more questions and then we'll have a closing. Bing, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question? Bing is in the Philippines.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really don't have any questions, but I just like to express my gratitude to Matthew Pax. I have a very vivid remembrance of you and the celebration of the Cosmic Eucharist in 2015 in the World Parliament of World's Religion. I was there, Matthew, and that was the highlight of my experience during that time. So thank you so much. And you also shared what Thomas Aquinas said, that the primary meaning of religion is thanksgiving, supreme gratitude. And I would like to thank you for that, and Thomas, and also to thank my father, because he used to say to me that be grateful in everything. So he inculcated in me the love of the Eucharist, being a Eucharistic minister. But more than that, that word that you said, be thankful in everything, means a lot, because Eucharist is thanksgiving. So I just hope that all the mass goers will really have the Eucharist as a way of life. And the experience of your Cosmic Eucharist meant a lot for me, and it inspired me more to create liturgies that are creation centered, bringing the natural world into our worship. And I continue to create liturgies that is creation centered, even if many priests wouldn't accept it, I still continue. So thank you so much, Matthew, for that very wonderful experience of your Cosmic Eucharist. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bing. Calvin, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment?
I have a question. My name is Patrick, by the way, and I'm from Ireland. So be careful what you say about our saint. Anyway, my question to you is, do you see any indication that the church, the present Catholic Church, is open to, or even, well, open to the whole idea of creation spirituality? Or the other issue I'd want to, in terms of the masculine and feminine, the whole issue of celibacy, do you see that as an obstacle to a lot of things? Or anyhow,
that's a whole, yeah.
Well, absolutely. Pope Francis, first of all, the name that he chose, you can't get a lot more creation center than Francis of Assisi was, but his encyclical on the environment, Laudate Si, was a major work. Brian Swim told me that he thinks Laudate Si is without doubt the best document on science and religion ever to come out of the Vatican. And the truth is, I'll tell you this, Laudate Si was written, 80% was written by a Filipino, well, an Irish priest in the Philippines, there we go, Sean McDonough, who went through our master's program and went back to the Philippines and started a series of books on spirituality and ecology. And Pope Francis plucked him up and took him to Rome and said, write this for me. And he wrote 80%, and my friend Leonard Buff wrote the other 15%. And then the Pope wrote about 5%. But I've written a major commentary on that encyclical, and I show how the role that the four paths of creation spirituality play in that encyclical. It's absolutely explicit, the via positiva, negativa, creativa, and transformativa. So I want to say this, I'm 81 years old now, and the previous two papacies called my work, quote, creation spirituality, they called it, quote, dangerous and deviant, unquote. But now I've lived long enough to see a pope plagiarize my work and put it into an encyclical. So I've lived a pretty full life now. And one thing you need as a Roman Catholic is a sense of humor, and also a sense of detachment and of history, perspective. And you realize how many people were beaten up in their lifetime, but honored after they died, long after they died, like Hildegard, 800 years after she died. Now, of course, the other issues you raised, yes, the issue of men and women in the Catholic Church, they're so far behind, it's scary. And, that it seemed to be a big deal for people to allow women to be acolytes or something. I don't know. Oh, my goodness. And the scandal, really, of the indigenous people from the Amazon going to that gathering in the Vatican with just one or two questions, the most important to them being, we want to ordain married people. And that was turned down. Nothing has happened. So that's just a scandal. I mean, so there's a lot of shadow in the current papacy too, in the current Vatican as we know it. And as we all know, there's a tremendous loud right-wing shadow, the Bannons of the world, who are always well heeled, always have a lot of money. They shout, of course, even though they're a small percentage, what I'd call the Nazi wing of the Catholic Church. It's a small percentage, but it's there. And of Opus Dei, which is the Nazi wing of the Catholic Church, and explicit fascists, they're loud and they are influential. They got Junipero Serra declared a saint, which is a horrible blotch on the Catholic Church, will be forever. I worked with the indigenous people here in California to resist that. And one of the leaders said to me, if the Pope goes through and canonizes Junipero Serra, he will be making war on indigenous people the world over. That is how serious the native peoples felt about that horrendous act. And of course, what the Catholic Church could do, the Pope could do overnight, is to undo the doctrine of discovery. These 3 papal bulls are the 15th century from 2 different popes that literally gave permission to Catholic kings and queens to go to other lands and to make slaves of the Africans and to take whatever they wanted from indigenous people anywhere, because these people were not Christian. And therefore, in essence, were not part of the Christian empire of Portugal. That was the first king, so blessed, or Spain, etc. So that, I say, I've been saying this for a long time, I'll say it again. The Pope should wheel out those 3 bulls from the 15th century into the center of St. Peter's Square, have television, and burn them. Now, they don't have to take the literal pieces. They can keep them under glass in the damn museum. But facsimile thereof, burn them, invite the world in to burn the doctrine of discovery. It is the basis of jurisprudence, even in America. Judge Marshall, Chief Justice Marshall, I think in 1806, adopted this jurisprudence. And they've done it in England too. So this horrible permission given Christian emperors to invade other countries and so forth is a scandal. And certainly we've gone beyond that after 500 years of genocide. So this is something the Pope could do any day, and he should do it. You who are still in good graces with him or with that organization should put some pressure on. This would be a thrilling moment for human history. And it has everything to do with lynchings and slavery and forcing indigenous people onto reservations and all the rest of it. I mean, it would be a big part of the healing of the traumas that indigenous people have been carrying for 500 years. For the Pope to do something about this and to make an apology that is more than just words, but I think a good ritual would be to see that doctrine of discovery in flames in St. Peter's with worldwide television broadcasting it. Amen.
Amen. Sounds great, Matt. Does this mean that you've gotten so much trouble or caused so much trouble that one day we're going to have a Saint Matt?
No. I made sure there won't be anything like that. No.
Okay, I think it's 8:43. How about we do one more question with a woman, since we just had a man. Victoria.
Thank you. I've learned so much from you, Matt, and I'm very grateful for your work in bringing all these different traditions together. And I've long been a student of especially the German mystic tradition. So it's really wonderful to see it coming to light in an international context. I've been working a lot lately on, I hate to call it interfaith dialogue because that's been so corrupted, but a real community that is bonded together by love, that across all faith traditions. And the one point that is for me like a thorn in the flesh, and I'm not sure how to resolve it, so I wanted to get your input on this, is that I agree with absolutely everything you've said and the other writers that you referenced, and I'm so excited about this move to sort of redress the issues of original sin, etc. But what do we do with Jesus in talking about the Eucharist? I mean, in a personal sense, because for me personally, although I see the truth in all faith traditions and this cosmic vision, which is so beautiful, the way you've portrayed it in your different books, etc. I don't know what to do with Jesus, because I myself have an actual, I've had so many experiences, mystical experiences with the Eucharist and without the Eucharist, but of Jesus as an actual person. And I feel like I'm in kind of a C.S. Lewis dilemma. And I'm not prepared to be an apologist the way C.S. Lewis was. Anyway, I could never follow his act. So I'm just wondering it's really a burning dilemma for me. So I just wanted some advice. Thank you.
Well, I don't think anyone has to apologize for Jesus. I think we have to apologize for some ecclesial interpretations of Jesus over the centuries. But I find people of all faith and no faith admire Jesus. I have a friend who's Buddhist, and he was raised in Thailand, although his family was refugees from Laos. But he's Buddhist and Thai. But he's made several pilgrimages to St. James Capistello and so forth. And he loves doing that, and he admires Jesus. And of course, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote 2 wonderful books on Christ. And in fact, when I met him, he came to speak at our school with 40 Buddhist nuns and priests and monks. And before we got on stage, when I introduced him, he sat next to me in a circle, and his monks were in a circle, but he was on my right on my right. And he said to me, and very softly, he said, the Vatican, now this was under the previous 2 popes. He said, the Vatican calls me the Antichrist, meaning him. And I'd never heard this before. I was shocked, but I kept my cool. And I said, I wouldn't worry about that. I've read your 2 books on Christ. You know more about Christ than they do. And with that, he started tapping my leg, my right leg. He was next to my right leg. And he tapped and he tapped. He didn't stop. He kept tapping it. And I realized, here's this sensitive, prophetic monk who's been denounced by the capital of Christianity, the Vatican, for being the Antichrist. I mean, obviously, this was eating away at his soul. And so, when I said that, he, it really meant a lot to him, obviously. But so interpretations of Jesus are one thing, and of course they evolve. And today, I think so many people can see that Jesus' courage and his spiritual genius and his teaching of compassion and all that is at the heart of any healthy religious worldview. So, and the fact that you've had your personal experiences with him is just wonderful. I've met a lot of people who aren't Christian who've had mystical experiences with Christ. In fact, I have a little totem pole right here that this fellow is not a Christian. He said his nearest religion, the Muslim, was Native American. But he was walking in the woods one day and Christ appeared and they had a conversation. They went on for like 40, 45 minutes and he couldn't, it just blew him away. And then he said, after it was over, he said, what is this? Anyway, he discovered my book on the cosmic Christ. And then he carved this, and you can see it's very Native American. It's got the 4 directions and the and the earth and sky and stars and wind and fire. And then Jesus is here, and then the risen Christ. He had experience of both in the woods. And he made this as a gift for me. He drove from Ohio, where this happened, out here to California to give this to me with his story. Wow. So Jesus, like the Black Madonna, is appearing to a lot of people today. And you don't have to have a sign on your head that you're a Christian. But you want to distinction that Jesus, the historical Jesus, the human being, and the cosmic Christ, the Christ. And remember that the cosmic Christ is a much older Christology than the Nicene Creed. And the Nicene Creed is 4th century, that same century that gave us Augustine and original sin and the empire. That is a century where the church took over the empire. And remember, it was the emperor himself who called the Nicene Council. So there's a little bit of shadow around that. Let's just say that. That's why I go back to the cosmic Christ, because that's in Paul, the first writer in the Christian gospel, writes about the cosmic Christ. And it's in other places too. And I wrote the book on the stations of the cosmic Christ. It is the basis of all the great stories in the Gospels. The Christmas story, Nativity, the baptism, the sky opened up, that's kind of cosmic. And then he goes out into the wilderness for a vision quest and wrestling with the demons and there with the wild animals. And of course, the transfiguration is the high point of an experience of the cosmic Christ. And of course, the crucifixion is coming up. Good Friday is set in a cosmic context. Let me say that, a cosmic context. It's not set in a context of I crucified my Lord and Savior. Reread any of the texts. And one of them, of course, talks about how the veil was rent in two in the temple. Well, we now know that in the 1st century, there was a big veil, a big canvas on the temple, and it was a painting of the universe. So it was a cosmic event, the death of Christ on the cross, of Jesus on the cross. And then, of course, resurrection was a cosmic event. And then Pentecost is a cosmic event. All the nations of the world were there, represented by the astrological number of 12 and so forth, all the tribes. So the stories in Christianity are cosmic stories. They're not individualistic stories. And again, the Jewish notion is not of individualistic salvation. It is about the whole, the community rising. And so the key, I think, to your question is distinction between Jesus and Christ. And when it comes to liturgy, like the Eucharist that was spoken of just shortly ago, remember that the Eucharist is the Christ of the cosmos. It's a cosmic Christ. So you're sharing, we're imbibing, we're eating and drinking the sacredness of the universe, of the cosmos. That's what the cosmic Christ is, the light in all things. Now, this is paralleled in other traditions. The Buddha nature in Buddhism is the same idea. And the image of God in Judaism is also about all beings, not just about human beings. But the cosmic Christ is that cosmic naming of the sacredness. We're back to how we started, the sacredness of the universe, the sacredness of creation. So I think that understanding makes the liturgies even more important, because they are really a way to connect to the whole again. That is where psyche and cosmos come together. And Aquinas says every human being is capable of the universe, capable of the universe. Well, ritual is one way where we connect to the universe, as I said earlier about Stonehenge. But the Christian ritual should be that way too. And so it's not just about Jesus and the wafer. It is about the cosmic Christ that is present to all of us and even available to give us a sustenance, spiritual and physical, that the Eucharist represents.
Well, thank you, Matt. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I just want to say, Vivian Hood in the chat box says, "Oh, Father, you have brought me back to life, connected me with my history." I think that really speaks to, what a lot of people are feeling here. I'm just wondering, Calvin, do you have a very quick question?
I don't know. I'll find out.
The question that's too long is the answers.
It has to do with spirituality, and spiritual experiences have a very strong emotional component. And I wondered, how do you explain the source of this experience in terms of why is it present? How did it develop? And how does it connect with evolution? Any thoughts on it, even small ones?
I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about.
It's a very emotional experience.
What is now a mystical experience?
Yeah, mystical experience.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I would say it's built into. It's very much part of evolution. It's built into our nature. Teilhard de Chardin talks about how the first humans must have been awestruck by the sky, awestruck by the seasons, awestruck by the ocean, and so forth. And so it's all about awe, isn't it? And Rabbi Heschel actually defines awe that way. He says, awe is the experience of the human mind confronting the universe. So, and awe is the beginning of wisdom. So that's the via positiva of the mystics. And it's available to all of us. And I think we all had it as children, unless we were raised in a very negative family setting. But I think that awe, Rachel Carson, her last book was about wonder and awe in children. And she said she found that in our culture today, and of course she wrote that in the 60s, awe was dead by 13 or 14 years old or so. And I quoted that once in a talk, and a person came up and said, I'm a teacher of kindergarten, 5-year-olds. I spend 95% of my time trying to bring awe to 5-year-olds today. In other words, that our culture has become so anthropocentric, and there's so much television watching, that children are finding it hard to find awe, that we have this nature deficit. And this is where Tom Berry was so right. We have to get children more into nature, growing things, and not to underestimate the importance of things like camping trips and camps, and ways to get the kids out of the house and out of the television, turning off television. Of course, now we have the social media thing and the Twitter and all that. So it's a real danger that, a wonderful California poet who was a Dominican brother for 16 years, Bill Everson, had this marvelous sentence. He said, most people experience God in nature or experience God not at all. So it's our responsibility as adults, and certainly as elders, to help create a culture and an educational system and a religious system and the rest that allows the young to become the mystics they are. And a lot of that is about nature. And of course, Julian of Norwich invented the word wanting, O-N-E-I-N-G, and it's a beautiful name of what the mystical experience is, wanting. So I think it's built into our DNA, into our evolution. And I'll cite someone who's not a theologian, Gaston Bachelard, this wonderful French philosopher, wrote an incredible book. He wrote some wonderful books, but incredible, not long, on architecture, really. And he says in there, he develops what I call the 3 I's. He says the human being is experience immensity, intensity, and intimacy. For me, that is the best telling of what mysticism is. in a mystical experience, you feel connected to the whole. You feel an immensity. You also feel an intensity. It goes deep in you and you remember it. That's proof that it's intense. But also, and this is the miracle in this, there's an intimacy. Even though this experience may be connecting you to the universe, it's intimate too. It's those three things. Check this out. Just check out what I'm saying after we're finished.
Yeah.
Check it against your experiences. Immensity, intensity, and intimacy. And to me, it takes my breath away, because what I'm saying is that's to use today's parlance, the software inside of us. We're built for this stuff. We're built for awe and mysticism, intensity, and intimacy. And this is something glorious about our existence and about our relationship to the whole. And I'll just share one mystical experience I had. It was at a Sundance, and it was around midnight. We were doing a sweat lodge. And when we came out, it was up in, the northern part of I think it was Montana or something. But when we came out of the sweat lodge about 1 a.m, the Milky Way, I'd never seen it like that before. So it was utterly visible. The whole, there's like a rainbow running the entire sky from one horizon of the earth to the other. And of course, after sweat lodge, your senses are alert and cleansed anyway. But I'll never forget it. It just took my breath away. And then when I go back to these three eyes, it was an experience of immensity. It was the first time I ever really felt connected to the Milky Way. And it was an experience of intensity. I've remembered it, and that must have happened 30 years ago. And it was intimate, So check that out with all of your mystical experiences with Jesus or Christ or the sky or anything else or a good novel or music, like Eckhart says, every being is a word of God, talking to us about God. So, this is a sacred world that we live in. And don't underestimate how busy the angels are today, trying to get our attention to and wake us up.
Oh my God.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for.
I think that's the perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Matt. This has just been remarkable, the way you brought so many things together. I'm just going to read a quote from one of Matt's books, the one on Thomas Aquinas, and then we will just say goodbye and have a good evening or a good day wherever you are. So here's the quote from Matt's book on Thomas Aquinas. For too long, Westerners have been alienated from the universe, stuck in our human-centered world. The new cosmic story can help us overcome that alienation. Awe and delight return. Love of the universe renders us drunk. The many new discoveries of the universe by science in our time has increased the occasions for such drunkenness. Ecstasy is another term for being drunk. The psalmist wrote, "We get drunk on the beauty of thy house." And Aquinas notes, the house is the universe. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And blessings on you all.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Wonderful.
Immensely grateful.